Thank you for joining me for this Encore presentation of the first episode of 19 Stories from Fear to Hope. This is the second Encore presentation in celebration of my first year anniversary of producing my podcast. And the reason that this particular episode is so meaningful is that Jen Keefe at the time was my accountability buddy who encouraged me to finally launch this podcast. And for that, Jen, I'm incredibly grateful to you. I appreciate you joining me for this. Jen is a fantastic guest and human being. Please stick around because I have details on how you can win one of 2 customized journals so you can start writing your own story. So without further ado, here is the first episode that launched July 8th, 2020.
Isn't this like the craziest thing? Like, really? I mean, can you even believe what these months have been? I haven't done the retrospective with anybody really yet. Like, my husband and I talk about it, but we've lived it together. Like, just thinking back about these months, it's crazy.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a surprise
outbreak. We only
outbreak.
have so many beds.
The issue of pandemic.
This
No
is not
social
how I thought I
distancing
would
at
end
all.
college.
They said that they would
We didn't
express
know
their
it would be
concerns
this,
about the
drastic
mask
so
supply.
quickly.
Where's the mask? Where's the
One
glove?
expert says a second wave is
Get away from
possible.
we all need some good news.
This is a message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand. We're gonna make it through this.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. Jen Keefe is a wife, mother, homeschool teacher, and blogger, and an award-winning voiceover talent specializing in e-learning, explainer videos, and corporate narrations. She's also the producer and host of the podcast Real Women's Work, a podcast all about how women work. From stay-at-home moms to entrepreneurs, from courtroom reporters and communication analysts to farm sanctuary owners and execs at Fortune 500 companies, if a woman's doing it, it's featured on Real Women's Work. Jen Keefe, welcome to 19 Stories.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm so happy and excited to be here, and especially right now to have this connection with you in my ears is awesome.
Tell us where you're located, first of all.
Hold on one second, Cheryl. My washer is in the spin cycle. I forgot to push cancel. I'm texting my son. Hold on.
This is going in the podcast, by the way. This is Real Women Working.
Yes, it is. Oh my gosh. It is. It's so funny, Cheryl. I thought the cycle was going to end before we started, but I kept thinking, remember to check it. And I didn't. So anyway, okay. I texted my kids. They'll stop it.
No, that's okay. Actually, before we started, a truck decided to pull over to the side of the road and blow leaves or something.
Isn't it the way? Like, really?
That's what happens. So where were we? How are you today?
I am good. I am good. So happy to be here. And I think were you asking where in the country I am, Cheryl?
Yes.
Okay. Right now, I am sitting in New Hampshire, which is back in my home state. I am right over the border from Massachusetts, so about 40 miles north of Boston. And we have a beautiful day today, which we haven't had too many of, so it's lovely.
That's wonderful because I think over the weekend you had this crazy storm, didn't you?
It just feels like this horrible, awful joke from Mother Nature, Cheryl, because amidst this, stay-at-home shelter in place, we have had cold and rain and snow multiple times during this whole thing, and it is really so much harder when you can't get outside with yourself and with kids. So, yes, we did have bad weather or challenging weather over the weekend, and I guess we're going to have another washout tomorrow, so that makes things tricky. So today's beautiful. We were outside a lot.
Well, I'd say if you have locusts landing on your back porch, then it's time to be concerned. And your pictures, by the way, that you post about where you live are just gorgeous. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about several of the things that you mentioned, but we heard a little bit about your podcast. What was the impetus for starting Real Women's Work?
Sure. Well, we will jump right in because that is the kind of one of the most vulnerable things I can talk about, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, why don't we go right for the
why
jugular?
don't we, Cheryl? Let's just do it. Let's get it. Let's set the baseline. Real Women's Work was really came out of two things happening simultaneously. And I just want to share, I had actually never really listened to podcasts before starting my own. I had heard about them, but wasn't really familiar with them. But simultaneously, a couple of things were happening. I went through, my timeline's off, 4 years ago now, maybe, a serious mental breakdown. I've had mental health issues for my whole life that were untreated. And I went through a serious mental health breakdown. And it was bad. It was really bad. It was really scary. The bottom lasted for about 6 weeks. And we were out in Denver, not around our family. And it was really, really hard. And as I was coming out of that, I abused alcohol for a lot of my life. Fortunately, just stroke of luck, I'm not an alcoholic. I can still have a drink and I'm fine, but I really used alcohol to self-medicate from my mid-20s, to my mid-30s. And when I had this mental breakdown, I knew I had to cut out the alcohol. I just knew it was not doing anything good for me, but I needed to figure out something to do in the evening that would replace that time. So I started walking. And we lived downtown Denver at the time. Fortunately, Denver has mostly nice weather all the time, which was surprising to me to learn. But I started walking at night. And I don't mean just like a 20-minute walk. I would walk for like 2 or 3 hours at night. And I would
Wow.
charge up my my iPhone, and plug in my headphones, and I would just walk around downtown Denver, miles, 2 or 3 hours a night for a long time. And so I would listen to music, and then I started realizing if I listened to music by female artists, it really helped. Like, I knew a little bit about their history. I knew what they must have gone through to get where they are, the baloney they had to put up with, and so I started listening to just female artists. And then I started thinking, I need more strong women streaming into my brain. Like, how can I get that to happen? And then I remembered podcasts, and I started looking for podcasts, and I found a couple. One, it wasn't anything to do with mental health. It was called Employee of the Month with Katie Lazarus. Do you happen to know that one?
I don't, but I find that an interesting title given what you were sharing that you were going through, that's what you gravitated to, and is that because that's one of the few things you could find?
Really, it was, and I just wanted something hosted by a female, and I only listened to she interviews men and women, but I only listened to interviews with women. Um, and it was really just kind of what I could find, but she interviewed just these incredible women who were really open about sharing things, and so I found a couple of others, and I was walking around listening to them thinking, "This is just such a gift," and they really made me feel so much better. At the same time, my daughter, who I guess was 8 or 7 at the time, asked me one night as I was kind of coming out of this mental health breakdown, she wanted to know what people meant when they said they were going to work. So I kind of gave her my answer, and she didn't want to know that people were, I work on a computer. She wanted to know, like, what are you doing on a computer? And as she was asking, I thought, I want to know that too. Like, I don't know. So like, what do people mean when they say they're this or they say they're that? And I posted on Facebook asking that questions just to give her that question to give her more diverse answers. And because I have mostly female friends, it was mostly women who responded. And I get goosebumps talking about it, Cheryl, because everybody who read that thread that day knew something awesome was happening on that thread. Getting to learn about how women do their work and what they do, and no matter what it is, it's interesting when you hear them talk about it. And I didn't want that to go away. And everybody kept commenting, "This is the coolest thread I've read all year." People were private messaging me, "Oh my gosh, can you believe what this one does or what that one does?" And so the two just kind of came together to preserve these stories and learn more about each other, and for me selfishly to get to talk to women. The podcast was born. That's a long answer, but it is a long.
No, it's a great answer because it filled your need at the time, and it also fulfilled a need for women who were searching for something to express what they do and to talk about what they do and to maybe connect with other women who were doing the same thing or maybe something completely different that they were thinking of doing. So I kind of see it as, that you were actually answering a void that other women were looking for and at the same time touching on something that you needed. So I had planned on talking about that later on, but you jumped right into it. And I think, especially during this time of shelter in place, when many people are dealing with stresses of automatically becoming either a stay at home mom or dad, teachers, remote workers, and then, of course, those on the front lines of this pandemic working under incomprehensible conditions and seeing things that probably only one sees during war times. And I imagine that many dealing with these situations will or are requiring some sort of counseling and therapy to help them process this time. And in sharing about your breakdown, if you don't mind going into that a little bit further as to, I mean, you shared some of the things that brought you through that, but was there a time that you reached out and said, "I need to talk to someone about this. I need to find someone who can help me process that," or really, what is there something that brought that on in particular? Was it a
Mhm.
crisis or was it just a point in your life?
Sure, Cheryl. And please know that you can stop me at any time if I'm talking too much about it. I will not be offended or feel stepped on or anything. I'm really pretty much willing to share as much as people want to hear. Um, it was a culmination of a life lived with severe anxiety. I had been to therapy in my early 30s and got over the worst of it. I mean, I had some really serious, before kids, some really serious, just nuts stuff, that was, I won't go into too much detail, but I really couldn't be alone in a house. It was crazy. Like, it's crazy to even think back to who I was then. But so I went to therapy, did cognitive behavioral therapy to get past all of that. I remember my first panic attack. I didn't know that's what it was, but I can remember my first one at 3. And I had them all growing up, and I always used to call them my confusion spells, not knowing what they were. So I got treated for all of that in my early 30s, and that was great. But there was, of course, a lot of underlying stuff that I guess I just hadn't dealt with. And we were away from family. And when we were out in Denver, I didn't make the same kind of connections in the same amount that I had back here. So I think that was part of it too. So it was a lifetime leading up to it. And absolutely, there was a point where I went on medication. I'm not ashamed at all to say that I went on medication. And, you see memes on Facebook and things on Twitter and, people saying you wouldn't be ashamed to take medication for dealing with whatever, high cholesterol, or,
Absolutely.
you
Sure.
know, and
Sure.
and of course that's true in theory, but really I think there's just still so much stigma around it and so much shame around thinking you're not strong enough to fix your own head, which is crazier than any mental health issue we could ever have. So I went actually first into my doctor, and just said, I need something. I'd only been on medication once before. And I talked to her and she knew me. And the very first thing I did was actually to get on medication. And I was no stranger to therapy. So bringing all of that stuff in was not a big deal or a problem to me. And then I can talk more if you want about like some practical things that I cut out and adjusted immediately out of like survival need that have stuck with me to this point that I really now view as essential self-care. And none of it is a bubble bath.
Actually, I would really love for you to talk about that if you care to, because the whole idea of 19 Stories from Fear to Hope is that this is a crisis time in our world. Again, there are people who've probably never dealt with the stresses that they're dealing with now, or if they have, never to the magnitude. And it's still, as you say, a stigma to talk about mental health and to talk about fears and to talk about the things that really can paralyze us. And I find that so interesting because whenever you have someone like a celebrity of Robin Williams, who was known globally as the man to lighten everyone's load and to bring a smile to their face and laughter to their heart. And of course, we know what happened with him. So I would actually, as much as you're comfortable sharing, love to talk about it because I think there are tools that people are still afraid to reach for.
I loved listening to you say all that, Cheryl. I think it's so accurate. And that fear, like, for a lot of people, maybe for the first time, are living in real fear. We're very lucky. So many of us, not all of us for sure, but so many of us here in the US are very lucky to live relatively free of fear. And so many people for the first time are maybe feeling real fear. And that is a really scary place to be. And I lived there most of my life. And one of the most interesting things, Cheryl, for me during this pandemic has been I haven't panicked yet. Now, I'm very lucky. Our income hasn't been disrupted. We were already homeschooling. I recognize all of that makes me very lucky. Also, I feel like over the past 5 years, I've been really filling my tool belt with tools that I can use to clear my thinking to keep me at a more healthy baseline. And there's an irony because, for me, when I hit rock bottom, I was already exposed to therapy. I knew medication was a possibility, and I had no shame around. Well, I shouldn't say no shame. I could get over my shame. I had to, but I could get over my shame to tap into those things. But I also had some people that I could reach out to. I reached out to a friend who had been very open about her own mental health struggles and asked her for some resources. And so she sent me 3 or 4 resources that were terrific. And they were predominantly books. And I think there were a couple of TED Talks, and one of the further ironies about this is when you're in that place of fear, whether it's from the pandemic or whatever it may be, our thinking is so muddled and so not clear. And even if we want to reach out to a therapist, for example, I've always said this, it is such a catch-22 to have to try to find a therapist when you're in crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is because you don't know if the relationship is going to work. You don't know if it's going to help your mental health. And you're investing so much of yourself in sharing your story and giving your backstory and sharing your history and all this stuff. You're just investing so much of yourself. And then if in 1 or 2 or 3 sessions later, you realize it's not a fit,
You have to
it
start all
really,
over.
and it sucks.
Yeah.
Like, it just sucks. So, and the same, I believe, is true, Cheryl, of resources, which is why I reached out to a friend. And I would recommend that to anybody listening who would like some resources. Reach out to somebody who you value as being level-headed, who, I don't know how to say this, doesn't have anything to sell you, frankly. Reach out to somebody who you really trust with their judgment and their word and ask them for some resources because, my gosh, Cheryl, we both know how many books and TED Talks and, podcasts are there that have the answer and the solution, right? And so you spend your money and your time and your energy absorbing and purchasing and carving out the time to ingest these resources, and then they end up being sort of really nothing. So medication resources, and I really got down to, do you want me to keep going? I've been talking a lot. I haven't done this in a while.
I really appreciate it. You are actually the dream guest. You ask a question and yeah, I just sit back and I'm like, I'm doing my nails. I don't know.
Oh,
I'm
I'm
shopping
sure, Cheryl. Yes.
on eBay. It actually is fantastic. And I just want to pull out a point that you mentioned that is so key,
Okay.
and that is judgment, because it's really easy to judge people and give them a quick
Mhm.
fix of what they should do versus offering. This is going to sound really new agey. I'm in California, so that's okay. I can get away with it. But a really safe place to land, a shoulder to land, someone who can listen to you as a true friend and offer up some possible recommendations, but not judge you and tell you to get over it.
Well, I could talk to you forever about this stuff. I think what you just hit on, Cheryl, is one of the most important tools I've ever put in my tool belt. And also the hardest one that I've ever, because all these tools, it's not a hammer. You can't just take it and put it in there. To get that tool in your tool belt, there's some work, a lot of work you have to do to be able to actually put that tool in your tool belt. And the idea of not judging not knowing where somebody is and never judging them, right? The being able to be in that place where we're not judging people. We have to, I'm going to sound like I'm not in Boston, but in California when I say this, but we have to stop judging ourselves. That is the best tool I've ever put in my tool belt, is to do the work to stop judging myself every minute of the day and being so self-critical all the time. And I feel like only when I was really able to do that, first of all, could I be with, because it's really hard to be with somebody who's in pain and grieving. It's so uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable because we do want to fix them. And then there's also the other side of where some people are really comfortable in their pain.
Yeah.
That's what they know. And you could offer them, it could be so laid out very clearly of steps they can take. And you hit the nail on the head, I think, is it takes work. It's like anything. If you want to be good at it, if you want to be healthy, if you want, fill in the blank, it takes work. And that means a personal responsibility.
And that's where, in my experience and my learning, boundaries have come in, because there's learning how to be with people who are grieving and in pain, which is a skill set. That's not something we know here, at least here in the US. We just do not know how to do that. So that's a skill set. And I do believe that comes from our own self-worth too. The higher our self-worth, the more comfortable we are being with anybody in whatever state they're in, until it crosses a boundary of our own. Right.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
so the person who is very, let's say, I think that's a good way to kind of say it, is very comfortable in their own pain. At some point, that's going to cross a boundary of our time, our investment, and so when it crosses that boundary, in my experience, the higher my self-worth, and by the way, just to go back, 100%, I believe, of my mental breakdown was I had no self-worth whatsoever. So as my self-worth raised, the easier everything got, being with people in pain, setting boundaries with people in a way that's really kind and not feeling entitled on my part, but just very much, this isn't something I have space for in my life. And so raising that self-worth, I think, not only allows us to really learn the skill set of being with people when they're in pain, and just, it's really hard to just listen. And I do think you're right that part of it is we want to fix it. But also, I personally think, at least in my own experience, most of it is we don't know what else to do except to offer to fix it. We don't know how to just sit there and listen and be present for that person.
Because sometimes that's all what people want.
It is.
I definitely want you to continue any further thoughts you have on this, but I want to go back to Real Women's work for a moment. What aspect of your podcast do you enjoy the most?
Without a doubt, it is connecting with women. That is absolutely what I enjoy the most.
And it really shows. You are a fantastic host, and I really enjoy your show. And at the end of this, we're definitely going to give people a way to listen to your podcast, connect with you in regards to your voiceover. And maybe that's a good place to segue as to your voiceover work. I know that you've won a National Pixie Award with an animation piece. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And is your podcast, is your voiceover, what is it you do for a living, Jen?
Well, isn't that a great question? To clarify, I narrated the video that won. I did not personally win the National Pixie Award, though that would be wonderful, but very honored to be part of the team that did win it. What do I do for a living? So it's so funny, Cheryl, because one of the things that we noticed between living in the Boston area and Colorado is, in Colorado, Chris and my husband and I would always say, nobody asks like what we do. Nobody really cares. They ask what we do for fun. They ask what we like. But so what I do for a living? I'm back at voiceover. I'm trying to think of a concise way to talk about my voiceover history. Like when people ask, how long have you been doing it? So I'd say I've been doing it for 12 years with a 10-year break. Because I don't know how else to, I don't want to say I've been only doing it for, a year, when really I've had a lot more training than that. But I also don't want to say I've been doing it for 12 years, because I haven't. So currently, I don't envision my podcast. God knows I'm open to earning more money for sure. But I don't envision that as an income producing activity for myself. That's a passion project. That's an outlet. that's just something that makes me feel really good and connected and kind of part of something bigger. So voiceover currently is where I am focused on earning income. And I haven't in a long time. I mean, I did sales in the time that, at home sales between my voiceover careers, that break, and earned a significant amount of income for the family that way. But other than that, I really have been at home with my kids. So I'm really sort of re-entering in this last, 6 to 12 months here into voiceover.
And speaking of your kids, you mentioned that you're married with a husband named Chris, and you have 2 children. And Jen, you're also a stay-at-home mom who homeschools. Is it safe to say that up until this current shelter in place and pandemic, there was some kind of stigma attached to homeschooling? As if somehow either the parents or the children were just a little bit different and homeschooling was a safer place to do it. And yet, probably a lot of people are realizing just how very difficult it is. Is that a safe assumption?
I think, well, it is absolutely a safe assumption that there was a perception of, what a homeschooling family was like. And I myself held it until I became one. I wasn't on board with getting the denim matching jumpers for all of us and I'm really embarrassed to say that was my perception of homeschooling families before I started
That's
doing
too
it
funny.
myself. Um, so I do think that is shifting, that people are maybe starting to see something a little bit different in homeschooling, but I really want to be um, clear that what people are doing right now is not homeschooling. People, they think they are, but they are not homeschooling. I'm not even doing what we normally do right now. The world is closed. People are quarantine schooling. People are, stay at home schooling. They're doing school at home. There's a very different flow. It's, first of all, it's very different when you choose it and you're not forced into it. And there's a very different flow to the day when you can leave the house and go to a museum and you meet up with your friends in the afternoon at the park, or it's just very, very different right now. And the reason I think it's so important that people understand that is some people are kind of enjoying this right now. They like their family being together. They like having their kids around. They like that they're getting to know each other in a way they never have had the opportunity because work and school separates, every morning and it's just a couple of hours together at night. And so I think it's important to say that so that people understand this is not what homeschooling looks like at all. So I think that's a clarification. I do, however, think that when kids do go back to school, people might be looking at us a little more positively than they did pre-corona.
Do you think that it's going to be changing how traditional schooling happens once kids go back to school?
I hope so. I really do, Cheryl. I hope it does. There are so many factors that come along with that, making sure that all kids have access to however that changes. I can't imagine how we'd be able to do that this century. I really can't. I know there's been some talk about that, but, I think experience kind of shows us education is pretty much the only thing that hasn't ever changed. The structure is all the same. It's a classroom with desks, with a teacher. Maybe sometimes we group the desks a little differently, but I suspect that we will just revert back to how we were pre-COVID.
So you mentioned how it's changed for you during this time. It sounds like you're inside more than you normally would be, or are you able to get out and actually do things that you would do before with your kids? Because I would imagine New Hampshire is a little bit different than being in a major city. And, how has this time affected where you live and your community and your environment?
Isn't this like the craziest thing? Like, really? I mean, can you even believe what these months have been? I haven't done the retrospective with anybody really yet. Like, my husband and I talk about it, but we've lived it together. Like, just thinking back about these months, it's crazy. Um, so New Hampshire, where I live, I'm about 40 miles north of Boston, and Massachusetts is a hot spot. I think it's the third worst in the country.
Is it really? I had no idea. I knew, I just found out New Jersey was really the 2nd outside of New York, but Boston,
It's
wow.
New York, New Jersey, Boston. Yeah, New York, New Jersey, Boston. Boston had really b and it was a just tragic, just tragic. So we have an interesting situation where we are because New Hampshire has hardly been affected at all. We're naturally physically distanced. Like we're, an outdoor state. Everybody kind of likes their their space and their um so we've had really very small relative to the rest of the country numbers here in New Hampshire, but because we're so close to Boston, we have been more things. We've had more like stay at home guidance and closed down guidance than we would have if we were not so close to Boston. In addition to that, what the kids and I access and with Chris too, much of the time is in Boston. So, we do museums and we do shows and all of that. I mean, everything's closed and we haven't seen our friends in like everybody. This is all we have this in common. We haven't what is it 8 weeks, 10 weeks? I don't even know. 8 weeks, I
Yeah,
guess.
depending
9
on
weeks.
where you are, not only in the country here, but certainly, other parts of the world. I've talked to business associates in other parts of the world who literally have not been out of their homes in outside of going to the store once a week for 3 months.
Yeah. We've done a couple of like walks on trails on our own, we're the only ones there, that sort of thing. But just like everybody, we're just home, with each other. I forgot what you asked, Cheryl. I'm sorry.
Just about how your time at home has changed, and you said the time in schooling your kids has changed because it's not traditional in the first place, but what does that mean
Mhm.
for being home more and having the restrictions that you currently have?
Yeah. I mean, I think we are absolutely at the advantage because of the way that we live. And I've said this to so many people. We already had a lot of this figured out. Chris already worked from home. I do everything from home and my kids don't go to school. We're used to being together, so much of the time. So it hasn't changed as much as it's changed for other people. That being said, um, it has changed a ton not seeing people. That's how it's changed for us is not seeing people. Not much else has changed for us. But not seeing people and that had such a great impact on all of us except for my daughter. She seems to be doing okay, but my husband, my son and I have like it, just about everybody else have really really struggled with not seeing the people we love.
And having that in-person connection, which is so interesting that your daughter's fine and the rest of you are, being challenged by that.
It is such a I mean, I don't think any of us have even begun to process what all of this is yet, right? Don't you think? I mean, we're still in it. Like, I just think, whenever this is kind of behind us, whatever that looks like, I think there is gonna be this factor of really, like, what just happened, you know? Like, what just happened?
Well, speaking of that, let's move into the aspect of hope, of how we get through this time. And I'm curious, you've mentioned some tools and skills and things that you've learned from a really difficult time in your life to help you navigate these stressful times. You mentioned about nurturing yourself, and it has nothing to do with bubble baths. And again, looking at the different ways that people do nurture themselves. So tell me what those are. If it's not a bubble bath, how do you relax or keep healthy in the sense that you feel good? I'm not talking about the traditional vision as you've spoken into many times
Mhm,
on kind of your Facebook posts and just in knowing you, it looks different to different people. So, what do you do
mhm,
to keep your mind and your body
mhm.
relaxed so you're not overwhelmed with everything?
Oh, that's such a good question, Cheryl, and so, so valuable right now. For me, because I have mental health issues, and I think a lot of us have unchecked mental health issues. And for me, the most important part of my health is keeping my mental health in a good spot. And so for me, that comes down to doing things that keep my self-worth high. My I ironically or whatever, a big way I keep my mental health in check is connection, physical connection with people. So that has been really hard right now. And continuing to use the tools that I've found, but like self talk, changing how we speak to ourselves is huge. It's really important, Cheryl, and I didn't know that. But when we talk about hope and moving forward and getting through fear and all of these things, self-talk is really, really important. And can I recommend two books actually, Cheryl?
Absolutely.
The first book, when I was at my absolute lowest, that was recommended by that friend of mine, is by Brene Brown, who I wasn't a huge fan of before. I didn't really know her work, and it's called The Gift of Imperfection. It's quick. It's like 90 pages, and it was the beginning of my turnaround. And the second book, by Dr. Kristen Neff, is called Self-Compassion. And self-compassion is a skill. I did not know that. I actually always thought self-compassion, I'm not that weak. Like, I don't need self-compassion. Then I ended up with a mental breakdown. So there we go.
Apparently you did.
Apparently I am human after all. But it's a skill. Self-compassion is a skill. And again, going back to judging and all of that, for me, once I really had self-compassion, I started being able to really be with people in a more present way. And then the last thing that I'll mention, because what is hope? I don't even know what it looks like right now. I don't know what hope looks like right now. I think we're at this really, just a place none of us, maybe a few people are still alive that could talk to us about going through this, but a place where we don't have any guarantees going forward of what life is going to look like and what we're going to get back to. And so I think we're in this unique place, at least from my perspective, where we really have to learn to find joy and happiness and fill our souls in new ways from within, in a way that we have never had to before. And I'm not saying that's good, like, oh, finally we're doing this. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, I think that's the reality. Like, we have to find ways of doing these things. I took this class, I think I might have told you, Cheryl, but through Coursera. It's a free class through Yale University, The Science of Happiness. And I would recommend anybody who is feeling a sense of not hopelessness, that's pretty serious, but needing to figure out some happiness. I think that tool in this time is phenomenal. It talks about all these ways of feeling, it teaches you all these ways of feeling happiness throughout the day. And happiness is also a skill set, which I did not know.
Just as compassion is a skill set.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about before, sitting with someone's pain, unless we've dealt with that, unless we have a way to come alongside someone where we don't feel like we have to fix them, having that kind of compassion and empathy, that is a real skill set.
And let me ask you something, Cheryl, and don't answer if you don't want to, but it's a good question for everybody, I think, to think about. Have you ever been with somebody, spent time with, in a time where you were being vulnerable or you were in pain, or maybe not, maybe you were happy, or maybe there wasn't a vulnerable moment? Have you spent prolonged periods of time with a person who really is just there with you?
This is going to sound so sappy, but I'm married to that
Oh
person.
my gosh, that's amazing.
When I say I am truly married to my best friend, and don't get me wrong, he's a man, he has that in him that he wants to fix things, but his own upbringing
Mhm.
and what he's been through has allowed him to come alongside. Okay, let's breathe in, everybody. Smell your flower. He's able to sit there and be with me and really just hear me.
That's amazing. I know you know that you're blessed. You are. I didn't have that until I was in my early 40s. And I met my friend Martha, who is that. She's only curious. She knows how to, kind of that term, hold space and be present, and the safety that you feel. Like, for me, until I had experienced that with my friend Martha, if Martha hadn't come into my life and let me feel what that feels like, I could never have known to give it to anybody else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense, and you mentioned something about getting back to life, and I'm paraphrasing what you said earlier, but I just wrote down "get back," and I think I think a lot of us are looking at what does that mean to get back to quote normal?
Mhm.
What are the things that we're going to realize that we can do without
Mhm.
that weren't really working for us, things that are working better? What brings joy in your day? And that probably can change from day to day given there's one other question I do want to ask you, but I want you to, to answer the question about joy. But then I remembered two of your family members that I have to ask you about.
Yes. Well, not funny that you would remember that when asking about joy. And I'm okay, on time, Cheryl, so whatever works for you. What brings me joy during the day? There are definitely different things that bring me, different things that bring me sort of that happiness but probably I feel joy on a daily basis when it's going to sound so, I don't know what, but when I've got my thinking clear. When I've got my thinking clear, one of the other big things that I've learned through all of this has been really important for my eliminating fear from my life, which I lived in for 40 something years, is learning how to critically think and think clearly. And the more afraid I get, the more I procrastinate on stuff like that, all clouds my mind. And maybe it's true for a lot of people, I don't know, but it just clouds my mind so that I can't see anything clearly. And when I can't see things clearly, for me personally, I really cannot feel joy because I am just stuck in fear. So I've gotten to this really phenomenal place of if I can keep my mind clear. Now I sound like I should be moving to California, but if I can keep my mind clear, and this is absolutely true, and I can't believe I'm about to say it. If I can keep my mind clear, I am pretty much always living in joy. And that is brand new to me as of the last couple of years. The first 40, I'm 45, the first 43 years I lived in fear, total fear. But if in these last 2 years, if I can keep my mind clear, barring health issues, that sort of thing, um, I'm pretty much living in joy, truly.
This is not to trivialize everything that you just shared and talked about, but it is such a waste of time to live into that
Yeah.
kind of fear that stops you from all the wonderful things that we can enjoy. And I really mean that I'm not making light of that kind of fear. So to have that peace on a daily basis where you don't operate out of fear, where you sit behind a mic or you write that letter or you compose or you fill in the blank to what truly brings you joy.
Yes.
Isn't that what we're all striving for every day?
I think so. I think so, Cheryl. And I didn't feel that what you were saying was trivializing any of it at all because I think you are absolutely right. And part of what I had to go through after kind of healing from the mental breakdown and building up my self-worth was really working through the anger that I had over so many years of my life being lost to that fear. And it was anger.
I really understand that. And I happen to know because you've shared these sweet little fur babies with us in pictures on your social media. Tell us about your little wee ones.
Oh, God, I love them so much. They're guinea pigs. They're guinea pigs. They're freaking guinea pigs. Oh my gosh, Cheryl. I did not want my daughter had been really wanting a guinea pig for her 11th birthday. So God, 11. She's only 10. Her 8th birthday. 8th birthday? Whatever. She'd been really wanting a guinea pig. And so we went and adopted this guinea pig and it bit and we shouldn't get this one, but she wanted this particular guinea pig and we stuck it in her room and closed the door. So I never even knew. I am not kidding. I
All right,
wouldn't even.
any animal rights activists listening to this, please do not write letters to Jen at
Oh, no. First of all, I'm actually vegan, and so this animal still had, like, the crème de la crème of the cage and the hay and everything because I wanted to make sure it was okay. I just didn't wanna see it living in our space. So my husband did anything Sydney needed. He went into her room because I couldn't stand that we had a rodent living in a beautiful cage in our home. Well, then fast forward not very long, a month or 2 later, I fell in love with this guinea pig. She was a rescue. She was 2 when we got her, and
Wait,
she
can I
did
stop you
bite.
for a second?
Yes,
What
yes.
is a rescue guinea pig? Like, was it on the side of the road? Was it
At a
someone that,
shelter.
brought it into it?
Yep, it
Really?
was
I
at a
mean, I'm wasn't being facetious. I just had never heard of a rescue guinea
Yeah,
pig.
no, it was at a shelter, and, we do rescue pets, we'll only do rescue pets, and, um, people, just like dogs, people will go to the pet store and see these cute little hamsters or these cute little rats or these cute little whatevers, and they'll get them, and then they don't want them, and so they bring them to the shelters, and people don't often think to go looking there for small animals too, but everybody should because there's so many there and they just love to be loved. So, and then we found out, Cheryl, that guinea pigs are not supposed to live with just one guinea pig. You're supposed to have at least 2. In Switzerland, it's illegal to have
Are
just
you
one
se
guinea
How did
pig.
you find that out? How does one find that out?
Because once we brought the guinea pig home, because of my love of animals, I needed to do all the research and make sure we were really giving this thing the best possible life it could have. And sure enough, now it's just common knowledge. You never, like, in all my I now have guinea pig circles. In all my guinea pig circles, it's just common knowledge. You don't get just one. You always get at least 2. Not the
Jen, are you sure you're not from California? Come on. Come on, fess up.
I'm in Boston. I mean,
I'm in
I'm
Boston.
in Boston. So yeah, so then we went out and got this second one, Jaina, and they are absolute members of our family. If we're watching TV on the couch in bed at night, we bring out the little pads and the blankets and we get them sitting there
I
with
love
us.
it.
And
I love
I
it.
mean, if you knew me, Cheryl, like my friends and family think this is hilarious because this was not me, but we adore them. They are the sweetest and they love us. And I didn't know that about these little guinea pigs, and they are awesome. I'll stop.
Do you want you now you mentioned
Yes.
Sydney. Sydney is your
Sydney is my
daughter,
daughter. Yes.
correct?
And yes.
And so what are the names
Our
of your little
piglets are
piglets?
Daisy and Jaina, and Jaina is a character from World of Warcraft,
Okay,
the game World of
there you
Warcraft.
go.
Yes. There you go.
So, Jen, I have so loved this time. I want to, I will put it in the show notes of how people can get a hold of you, but maybe you can let us know how can people get a hold of you?
So the podcast, first of all, thank you, Cheryl. This was awesome. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I'm very rusty, but I just love talking to you. And I think what you're doing here is beautiful and needed. And
Oh,
as
Jen,
we
thank
come out
you.
of this place that I was referring to as we were talking, Cheryl, where we're all just like, what happened? I think this will help people to process the coming out of that. So thank you for doing it. I think it's great. And also, by the way, you have a fabulous voice. Have you ever thought of doing voiceover?
Oh, you're so
I love your
kind. I'm
voice.
working at it. It's a work in progress. It's been a 40-year work in progress.
Here we are going forward. So the podcast is Real Women's Work, and realwomenswork.com and Real Women's Work on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And I'll just share, Cheryl, one more. I don't do a ton here. I keep thinking about doing more, but for anybody who might be either looking for homeschool thought or whatever, but more important to me, for anybody who is sort of in that place of feeling, women specifically, feeling really low self-worth, um, maybe looking for some resources because mental health is struggling, or just trying to think of, what are those skill sets, boundaries and self-talk and critical thinking and all that stuff. I also do have a website that I don't write a ton on, but it's ponderingjen.com. And I do have some resources on there that people might like. So I'll mention that.
Wonderful. Thank you for telling people about that because, again, maybe in the comfort of their own home, people, women can reach out in a way that
Yes.
they would not have felt comfortable in doing so before. And before we wrap up, Jen, is there something you'd like to tell our audience that I haven't asked you about? Is there, having a platform, of course, you've got your own podcast, but I mean, if it's all yours now, if there's something you wanted to share, is there a song you've wanted to sing? Anything?
Yes, I'll sing a song. No, I really won't, but I would love to because My kids get really they don't like me to sing, and I love to sing, so my gosh, give me a microphone and the opportunity to sing, and, but I won't do that. But what I mean, gosh, I feel like there's so much that we'd all like people, we all have our things that we've learned, but I'll just let myself get really corny for a minute and say what I really wanna say, because at this time, like, what other time is it really so okay to be so open and vulnerable than something like this? But I guess what I would like people to know, for me, it's really women specifically, is that you really are capable. You are capable of creating the life that you want, whether that's just to find more joy throughout the day or to become a voice talent or a podcast host or a doctor. You really are capable, and there really have been a lot of things that have happened to us specifically as women that have prevented us from believing that. And we live in a really fortunate time where we have access to all sorts of women who show us otherwise. And so if you're in that place where your self-worth is low and your mental health is struggling, or you feel stuck and you just want something more, fill your life as much as you can with people who are doing it, with people who are doing it, and let your life be flooded with that, because we really are all capable. And I really wish I had known that when I was 10.
You and me both, Jen. I really appreciate your time. You're such a delight. Give your little piggies a snuggle for me, will ya? Some extra whatever it is they
Oh, I
munch
think I
on.
can arrange for that for you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you for joining me today for 19 Stories, From Fear to Hope. If you'd like to be entered into a drawing, go to my website, soundsatchelstudios.com, click the podcast page, and submit an audio post of your review of this or any other episode that you may have enjoyed. I'll be entering your name into a contest to win one of 2 customized journals so that you can begin writing your own story. I'd like to once again thank Jen Keefe for being willing to tell her story and for posing the question, what other time is there to be so open and vulnerable? I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips in so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic. BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com. Visit my website at soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at CherylHollingVO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories From Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Dangerous. Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.